I always thought the quiet hours belonged to me. Those late nights when the office had emptied out, when the hum of the vending machine was louder than the chatter of sales calls, and the glow of the monitors felt more like a heartbeat than a light. I used to find comfort there, walking the halls alone, the sound of my shoes echoing in a space that once carried my voice, my decisions, my legacy. But on that particular night, I felt something shift, not loudly, not obviously, just a subtle wrongness. The lights had been replaced recently, newer LEDs that buzzed faintly in a way the old ones never did. The cubicles were rearranged, tighter, cheaper, stripped of the warmth that used to fill the floor when people decorated desks with family photos and inside jokes pinned to walls. Even the smell of the place was different, cleaner somehow, but lifeless, like someone had scrubbed away the human part of it. I stood there, 33 years into my career, and for the first time, it felt like I was a guest in a building I had built brick by brick. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm 58 years old, and until that week, I was Senior Operations Director at a firm called Axton and Pierce. A name you might not know, but one that used to matter in our industry. I'd been with them since I was 25, back when the walls were bare and the future felt limitless. I gave them my youth, my energy, every ounce of loyalty I had to spare. 33 years of 12-hour days, red-eye flights, late-night problem-solving, and carrying other people's mistakes on my back. I believed that loyalty meant something here, that if I carried the company through storms, the company would carry me through age. The next morning, they proved me wrong. She called me into her office just after 9. My director, Miriam Hale. She'd only been with the company 6 years, yet somehow she sat in the chair that used to belong to a man who believed in me. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She looked at me over her glasses, lips tight, and said, "Daniel, it's time for new blood." 4 words, 4 bullets, fired point blank. I remember sitting across from her, watching her slide a folder across the desk with my severance packet neatly typed inside. My ears were ringing, but I stayed composed. She spoke about strategic vision, about fresh perspectives. I nodded, calm, like I'd expected it all along. 33 years dissolved into a polite dismissal. Then she called him in. His name hardly mattered, but I'll never forget his entrance. 22 years old, straight out of college, still carrying the smell of dorm rooms and cheap beer. His handshake was limp, his smile smug, his eyes lit up with the kind of arrogance you can only have when you've never been punched by the world. He sat down in the chair I had just vacated and asked, with complete sincerity, "Do sick days roll over here?" That was my replacement. I should have been angry. I should have shouted, slammed my fists on the desk, demanded answers. But I didn't. I smiled. I wished them both well. I shook the kid's hand like he'd earned the right to be there. Like 33 years could be replaced by someone who hadn't even been alive when I started building this place. I picked up the small cardboard box waiting for me at my desk, filled it with the remnants of my career. Photos, awards, a mug with a crack in the handle, and walked out without a word. The halls that had once carried my footsteps felt different now, colder, smaller, as though the building itself wanted me gone. I passed the receptionist, who gave me a sad, confused look, but I didn't stop. I didn't need pity. I needed silence. The kind of silence that comes before the storm. Outside, the air was sharp. I set the box on the passenger seat of my car and sat for a moment, staring at the glass tower I had devoted my life to. Inside, they were already celebrating the arrival of new blood, blind to the rot that was about to set in. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even look back when I drove away. Because they thought they'd taken everything from me. They thought 33 years had been left behind in a cardboard box. They thought I left empty-handed. They didn't know what I took with me. When people think of a corporate director, they picture someone shuffling papers, signing forms, and taking credit for the work of others. They never saw what I really did. On the surface, my title was Senior Operations Director, but underneath, I was the backbone that kept Axton and Pierce standing. I designed the workflows that cut through chaos when departments collided. I wrote the contingency manuals that executives dusted off and passed as their own genius during quarterly crises. I built the quiet bridges between clients and suppliers that kept contracts alive when everything else was burning. My fingerprints weren't on the front page, but they were on everything that worked. For decades, that was enough. What nobody knew, not my director, not the boy they sat in my chair, was that I never trusted any system I didn't personally safeguard. Every contract we signed, every negotiation I secured, every workaround I invented to plug the holes left by someone else's incompetence, I made copies. Not sloppy duplicates, but encrypted backups, redundancies on redundancies, private hard drives, cold storage, physical binders labeled in a code only I understood. I never thought of it as insurance. I thought of it as preservation. If Axton and Pierce was a machine, I was the one who kept the spare parts hidden in case the engine blew. And after 33 years, I had enough spare parts to rebuild the entire machine on my own. They didn't know that while I smiled and nodded through speeches about team synergy and innovative culture, I was the one fixing their mistakes at 2 a.m. The times a vendor threatened to pull out, I was the one who called their CEO personally and talked them down. The times a client found a loophole in our terms that could have cost millions, I was the one who rewrote the language before legal even woke up. And when the numbers didn't add up, when someone upstairs fat-fingered a budget line and nearly tanked a project, I was the one who stayed overnight, quietly moving decimals, calling in favors, and saving jobs that would never know they'd been saved. I missed birthdays for this company, anniversaries, vacations that never happened, my son's first baseball game, my daughter's piano recital. I traded them all for late-night flights, tense boardrooms, and hotel rooms that smelled like stale coffee. I believed the sacrifice was worth it. I believed Axton and Pierce was worth it. And for 33 years, I never doubted. Until they told me I was outdated. That word still sticks. Outdated. Like a piece of software past its version number. Like I hadn't been the one updating everyone else for decades. They replaced me with a boy who couldn't even hide his arrogance. Within weeks, I heard what I expected to hear. Clients were calling, complaining that deadlines were slipping. The financial department was scrambling because invoices weren't signed on time. Half the staff was rolling their eyes at meetings when he tried to talk strategy, spitting out buzzwords he'd picked up from LinkedIn as if they were revelations. He didn't listen, he didn't learn, and worst of all, he didn't respect the people who actually kept things running. I knew the warning signs. When talent starts leaking out the door, when quiet veterans in the office suddenly start polishing their resumes, when clients stop answering calls, that's not bad luck. That's the kind of incompetence that spreads like a virus, choking every part of a company until the only thing left is a glossy logo covering a hollow shell. I watched it happen in real time, my contacts whispering updates, my old colleagues sending me messages about the chaos. Some reached out in frustration, others in fear. I didn't respond, not yet. I didn't need to. The rot was already spreading, and I knew better than to get in its way. Silence has a way of doing more damage than shouting ever could. So, I waited. I listened. I let the boy and the woman who hired him believe they had won. Every headline, every self-congratulatory post online, every smug smile they flashed at industry events. It was all a mask stretched too thin. The truth was simple. They had pushed me out, but they hadn't taken the one thing they needed most. Because while they were stumbling, while they were bleeding contracts and losing faith, the systems that kept them alive were still mine. The hidden files, the contingency plans, the private numbers, scribbled in notebooks that could resurrect deals in hours. I held them all. They could cut me out of the office, wipe my name off the directory, and lock my badge in a drawer. But they couldn't erase what I had built. They'd called me outdated, but the tools they'd need to survive, those were mine, and I hadn't left them behind. Preparation isn't about noise. It isn't about shouting victory before the first strike lands. Preparation is silence, patience, and the discipline to move pieces across the board without letting anyone know you're playing. After Axton and Pierce cut me loose, I didn't wallow, I didn't rage, and I didn't waste time begging for recognition. I built something new. Not an empire, not yet. A perimeter, a line that separated me from the life I had given away and the war I was about to start. The first step was simple. Incorporation papers for a consulting firm. Mercer Advisory. Small, almost invisible. I kept the office lean, one rented suite in a nondescript building downtown. Furniture I assembled myself. No receptionist, no glossy marketing campaigns. It didn't need to look impressive. It needed to be functional, quiet, ruthless, a place where strategy could unfold without distraction. Then came the calls. Not mass emails, not social media blasts, just quiet phone conversations with people I'd known for years. Former clients who trusted my judgment, vendors who had relied on my word, colleagues who remembered that when things went wrong, I was the one who fixed them. I didn't pitch myself. I didn't beg for business. I just reminded them I was still here, still steady, still capable. One by one, they drifted toward me, some cautiously, others eagerly. They weren't following me out of pity. They were following because they knew the boy in my chair couldn't lead them through a storm. I moved carefully, strategically, never taking too much at once, never making my hand obvious. A contract here, a supplier there, a consulting gig that looked harmless on the surface, but cut into the old company's foundations. I treated every move like wiring explosives under a house. No one notices until the switch flips, and by then, it's too late. Meanwhile, Axton and Pierce paraded their new blood like a trophy. The magazines ate it up. Headlines about innovation, features about generational leadership, glossy photographs of my replacement in designer suits he hadn't paid for. Miriam, my old director, stood beside him at every event, her smile stretched like it was carved in place. They thought they were building momentum. They thought the world believed in their fresh start. I watched every announcement, every LinkedIn post, every hollow press release, and all I saw was desperation wrapped in a bow. Because behind the curtain, the rot was spreading. The whispers reached me before they reached the public. Vendors who hadn't been paid on time. Clients complaining about projects that were weeks behind schedule. A lawsuit brewing from a partner who'd been misled by sloppy contract language. Morale inside the company sinking like an anchor. Good people quitting. Mid-level managers grumbling about leadership that couldn't manage its own egos. It wasn't just decline. It was decay. The kind that spreads quietly until the entire structure collapses under its own weight. I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. That wasn't my role. My role was to keep adjusting the perimeter, tightening the circle, making sure every path they tried to take eventually led back to me. And I did it without raising my voice, without showing my face. I didn't need credit. I needed precision. Each night, I sat in that bare office, the hum of the city muffled through the windows, and mapped their decline. Spreadsheets of their clients, notes on the vendors they hadn't paid, cross-references with the whispers from my own growing network. I wasn't building a company in the traditional sense. I was building a weapon, small, lean, efficient. One designed not to compete with them, but to bleed them out. It felt clinical, almost surgical, like setting traps no one could see. And the best part was watching them smile for the cameras, while the ground beneath them rotted away. They thought they were untouchable, safe behind their walls of reputation and branding. But I knew the truth. I'd been the one patching those walls for decades, and without me, the cracks spread fast. I stayed patient enough to let the pressure build, patient enough to let the silence work for me. Because the thing about silence is that it makes people comfortable right up until it suffocates them. I had given them 33 years of my life. Now, I was going to give them 3 months of death. Collapse doesn't come like an explosion. It comes like a leak in the ceiling, a drip that spreads into rot, until one day the whole roof caves in and everyone acts surprised. That's what it was like watching Axton and Pierce unravel. Slow, inevitable, brutal in its own quiet way. The first cracks were small, missed deadlines that used to be unthinkable on my watch. A client's shipment delayed 2 weeks because the 22-year-old in my old chair had signed off on a logistics provider without checking their capacity. The emails from that client made the rounds in private circles, each one sharper than the last, until word spread that Axton and Pierce couldn't be trusted to deliver on time. The boy tried to blame subordinates, but he didn't realize how fast resentment spreads when you throw your own team under the bus. By the end of that quarter, morale was sinking like an anchor, and the whispers reached me before they ever reached the boardroom. Then came the money. He approved a sponsorship deal with an influencer who had no relevance to our industry, funneling hundreds of thousands into a campaign that collapsed within weeks. Investors started calling Miriam for reassurance, and she, ever the performer, plastered on her practiced smile and spun it as a bold experiment in brand reach. But spin doesn't pay invoices, and soon vendors were complaining about late payments. I didn't have to dig for proof. The whispers found me. People who used to be loyal to Axton and Pierce now quietly slipped me updates, shaking their heads at the circus their company had become. At night, I sometimes parked across from the building, watching the glow of the top floors. I used to know those lights like constellations, each one marking a department, a project, a problem being solved. Now they looked scattered, frantic, staying on later and later, as if the building itself was panicking. I would sit in the dark, engine off, and remember the nights I used to be inside, carrying them through crises they didn't even understand. Now I just watched as they drowned in problems I would have solved with a single phone call. Digitally, I tracked their decline like a surgeon monitoring a dying patient. Public filings, financial reports, shareholder letters. I dissected every line. The numbers were bleeding red, debt piling up, legal fees mounting. When the first lawsuit hit, a breach of contract claim from a supplier they had stiffed, I almost laughed. That supplier had been mine once. I had kept them loyal, with nothing but respect and consistency. One mistake, one arrogant dismissal from the new regime, and they turned predator overnight. The real wound came when their largest client finally broke. I'd been patient, never pressing, never making an overt move. But when the boy mishandled a negotiation and tried to strong-arm them with terms so sloppy it bordered on insulting, they called me. Quietly, without hesitation. Within 2 weeks, I had signed them under Mercer advisory. That was the moment the bleeding turned fatal. Losing that client was like pulling the heart out of their chest. They could keep smiling for the cameras, but everyone inside the industry knew the truth. Axton and Pierce was gasping for air. Employees began leaving in waves. Not the dead weight, not the new hires looking for easy paychecks. The veterans, the ones who had held that company together, while Miriam preened for reporters and the boy played executive. They came to me, not as supplicants, but as survivors. They wanted to work where competence still meant something, where loyalty wasn't treated like a punchline. I took them in carefully, never all at once, never loud enough to raise alarms. But each one who crossed over weakened Axton and Pierce further, until whole departments looked like hollow shells. By the end of the fiscal year, shareholders were demanding answers. Calls were made, meetings held, statements drafted. Miriam's voice was still polished, still confident, but her eyes in those glossy magazine photos looked strained. The boy, once so smug, now looked lost, his suit hanging loose, his smile brittle. They were running out of stories to tell, and everyone could see it. I kept my distance. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to announce what I had taken from them. All I had to do was wait, watch, and let gravity do what it always does. Collapse isn't personal. It's inevitable. But what they didn't understand was that everything so far had been natural decay. Their arrogance, their incompetence, their ignorance of what held their company together, that was just the storm breaking them down. They thought the storm was bad. They didn't know the lightning was still waiting to strike. The end came faster than they ever expected, though to me, it unfolded with the steady rhythm of a plan, long in motion. Axton and Pierce had been staggering for months, bleeding contracts, losing veterans, sinking deeper into debt. What they didn't know was that the one account keeping them alive, the last artery pumping blood into their failing body, was already in my hands. I had spent weeks laying the groundwork, patient, deliberate, never tipping my hand. When the moment came, I didn't force it. I simply let the scales tip, and gravity did the rest. The contract was with Halberg International, a logistics giant with enough weight to make or break entire firms. They had tolerated Axton and Pierce's incompetence longer than I thought they would, mostly out of habit, partly out of pity. But the 22-year-old sealed their fate with arrogance. He walked into a renewal meeting with a presentation so sloppy it would have embarrassed an intern, full of jargon, empty promises, and numbers that collapsed under the lightest scrutiny. I didn't even have to push. They came to me afterward, quiet, frustrated, asking if I could offer stability where chaos had become routine. I didn't oversell. I didn't beg. I told them what I'd always told clients in my 33 years of loyalty. I will deliver, on time, and without excuses. That was enough. The moment the ink dried on that contract, Axton and Pierce's lifeline was cut. It was surgical, precise, no screaming, no spectacle, just silence as their largest account slipped away. I knew what it meant. They knew too. It wasn't just a lost client. It was their last hope of recovery, gone in the space of a signature. From there, the collapse wasn't slow anymore. It was an avalanche. The news spread through the industry within hours. Other clients, already uneasy, pulled out. Vendors who had been patient demanded immediate payment or severed ties. Investors, finally seeing through Miriam's practiced smile, withdrew funding and filed suits to protect what scraps were left. Employees who had been clinging to paychecks realized the ship was sinking and bolted en masse. I watched it all unfold, with the same calm precision I'd used to assemble a rifle in my younger years. Each step clicked into place, with the sound of inevitability. First the contract, then the clients, then the vendors, then the staff. Trigger, chamber, scope, round. A weapon assembled not from steel and powder, but from silence, patience, and betrayal, finally brought full circle. Miriam tried to hold on. She gave interviews, talked about restructuring, about strategic pivots, about learning from setbacks. But her words were empty. The world could see the cracks spreading behind her polished facade. The boy tried to vanish into the background, no longer smug, no longer arrogant, just a pale shadow of the promise he had once been packaged as. The magazines that had hailed him as the face of a new generation now ran features on his failures, each headline sharper than the last. Their reputations didn't just falter, they disintegrated, and then came the final humiliation. Bankruptcy. Public filings declaring the death of a company that had once stood tall, reduced to line items and liquidations. The office building that had been my second home for 3 decades went up for auction, its windows empty, its halls stripped bare. The empire they had stolen from me was gone, dismantled in months, erased from the industry like it had never mattered at all. I drove there one last time, parking across the street where I had once sat in silence, watching their lights flicker through long nights. Now the building was hollow, dark, its empty glass staring out at nothing. I stepped out of the car, stood on the curb, and let the sight sink in. All the hours I had given, all the loyalty, all the sacrifices, they had thrown them away for new blood, and now there was nothing left but ruins. I stood there until the wind picked up, rattling through the for sale sign bolted to the front steps. Then I whispered the words I had carried with me since that morning in Miriam's office, when she told me I was no longer needed. Outdated, huh? The word hung in the air for a moment, swallowed by the silence of an empire reduced to rubble. I turned, walked back to my car, and never looked over my shoulder again.